One of the issues that really surged to the forefront of national political debate and elite awareness in 2016 was the addiction and opioid overdose crisis. And, you know, in 2018, we actually saw a little bit of progress.
Slight downturn.
The number of overdose deaths actually went down a bit. Now we have numbers in from 2019, and they are back up, surpassing the highs prior to 2018, surpassing the 2017 and 2016 highs, and even more troubling and maybe not surprising, during the pandemic, the early data that we have coming in from this year shows those numbers continuing to escalate in what would be year over year the sharpest increase that we've seen since 2016. So some really troubling statistics here.
Yeah, this is really terrible. I mean, we have 37,000 deaths in 2020 so far involving fentanyl or a similar drug. And that, as you were just pointing out when we were discussing kind of the statistics behind this, a lot of the deaths here can be attributed towards fentanyl, and much of the fentanyl actually moving west through drug distribution systems. Predominantly, black tar heroin seems to have been decreasing in many of these places, while fentanyl use has increased. And this is, I mean, yeah, it's absolutely horrible, because it's also coinciding with a methamphetamine addiction as well as cocaine use kind of across the country. It's a perfect storm. And it's not just this, it's everything. Marijuana, alcohol, all substance abuse is way up as people are locked inside. I read these horrible stories about people who had just gotten or were in recovery and were at home, had lost their job, lost their support system, and overdosed almost like immediately after losing their job. Or, you know, somebody, I think we covered it on the show, about somebody who actually went back to work, was fired for the second time during the pandemic, who was in recovery and overdosed like 13 hours later. And, you know, stuff like that is happening all over the country. I don't know any other way to describe it. It's horrific.
Close to 72,000 people died of drug overdoses last year, and we're on track for numbers that far surpass that in this year, in the midst of the pandemic and all the despair and disruption that has entailed. And look, we talk a lot on this show about the real metrics of how the nation is doing, you know, which ones are fake, right? GDP growth or the stock market growth obviously has nothing to do with how ordinary Americans are faring in terms of their health and livelihoods and well-being. This is one of those metrics that is like a flashing red alarm that, you know, first of all, this is just devastation. And you and I have both been to towns that have been particularly hit hard by this crisis. Horrifying. The devastation in those communities with their family members, with their children in certain cases, is horrible. But it also says something is deeply wrong in our society, that we could have a wealthy nation as we do, that you could have prior to the pandemic, and a lot of these numbers are prior to the pandemic, you know, top line number, oh, it's doing great, everything's up, the economy's roaring, unemployment's so low, and still have these kind of numbers tells you there is something deeply wrong in the core of our society.
Yes, sir. I mean, no, you're a sick country if you can't provide for your people, and if they're killing themselves. There's a suicide crisis, then there's a drug crisis, there's a substance abuse crisis, there's an economic crisis. Fertility rate is an all-time low. Marriage rate is 2018, lowest of all time. It's not a healthy society. So, I mean, yeah, I'm reading through this, and one of the biggest problems that they have here is that there's not enough funding for a lot of recovery programs. And they're saying that social isolation is one of the biggest components of a drug overdose risk for those who are in recovery. Social isolation. Wow. That's what we're in right now. I don't see, you know, what are you going to do? What is the way around this? Which is that a lot of people just felt let down. They felt, you know, abandoned really by not being able to continue to go to their meetings or have social support systems. Or there's so many different things that people build into their lives in recovery who I've spoken to, which are gone now, just gone, right? Clubs, they have meetups, you know, many of the things that they would do, running clubs, like things like this, those aren't happening right now. And, you know, huge drug overdose like this, it's just terrible, and it is the mark of a very sick country.
Yep.
It has been for a long time.
One more tragedy. All right, more rising for you after this.